Hi, everyone. Welcome to my birthday party. um, this is something that I started a few years ago after a severe depression and having had several bouts of cancer. And I felt like I came back from the dead and really wanted to start celebrating not only life, but my life, which one of the ahas was that I hadn't really been doing that. And so there's nothing more that I love than teaching spiritual themes, and being with the people that give me a reason to wake up every day. So it's usually on my birthday on March 14th, Pi Day, and we'll talk about the significance of that, what it means to me at least. But this particular class has been joined with the shaman initiation and depth psychology program that we offer at Hidden Truths, because it's a lecture on the relational field, the importance of circles and fields and energy, the trickster. And so it's an overlap of what I was going to teach, and I figured I would join the groups. The other is that we're going to be talking about this concept of the other. And so even though we're a group of people that meet monthly, we've invited so-called others in, and that's some of the thematic that we're going to be talking about tonight. So I want to thank you all for coming to my birthday party. A little history of, particularly my birthday is on Pi Day, and pi is all about the circumference of a circle. And we're going to be talking about the importance of circles and fields as they relate. And the symbol for spirit is a circle. And so there's that thematic tied in to the importance of the date. It's also Einstein's birthday and the day that Stephen Hawking chose to exit the Earth. So I thought that was a cool coincidence. And I'm just going to nerd out a moment on symbology and numerology just for a second. The number 1 is the number for circle or spirit. The number 3 is the number for triangles and tricksters. And the number 4 is the number for squares and the earthly world. So in the number itself, we're talking about the 3 shapes of the entire universe: circles, triangles, and squares. If you want more on that, for those of you in the shaman program, there is a whole lecture on that. And if you want more on that, there's more information on the law of octaves, which is where this comes from. I can send to those of you. So you can just shoot me a message and I'll be happy to share my theory on that law. So that's some of the nerdiness of the number. Also, the number 3, as I said, is linked to the trickster, which is the archetype that we're going to be talking about today, specifically through the serpent, the animal totem of the serpent. And the number 1 and 4 equals 5. In numerology, bring everything down to a number between 1 and 9. And 5 is the number of growth. And we can only grow spiritually in the guise or in the ambit of a trickster. So that's my little nerdy note for the reason why the birthday and the number is so cool. And I can really appreciate the significance on many levels of the date of birth in which I incarnated. So thank you all for being here. Any questions about tonight? I have a little agenda and I have some course objectives, but for those of you who are in the shaman, at the end of class, if there's questions about our last class in Crow, just hang out and I'll answer those, or you can put those in the chat. And I'm trying to make this the 7 to 9 p.m. for the East Coast. That's our scheduled class. I'm not the best at doing that. If you have to leave, just leave. The recording will be available, but I'm really trying to stay within the 2 hours. So I want to start with a song. It's an oldie but goodie. I'm going to stop the recording for those of you who are watching the recording. It's The Gambler by Kenny Rogers. YouTube sometimes will kick the video off if I share a song that it's copyrighted. So I'm just going to pause it. So I want you to pay attention. And most of you probably know it, but pay attention to the lyrics and what stands out for you. So what stands out lyric-wise? Why would I play this song on a class on spirituality? And what stood out that might have some relevance?
I actually love to play poker. So
okay. Somehow that does not surprise me at all.
And I'm actually very good at it.
That's even less surprising.
And with that said, I've always said that playing poker is the perfect metaphor of living life. I kid you not. Perfect metaphor for life. It's all a gamble. Didn't we have a conversation not too long ago? We're all winging it.
Yeah, we had a conversation, I think like 2 days ago about this. So there's a wonderful movie, if you have not seen it, with Clive Owen called The Croupier. And it takes place in a casino. And I personally think it's one of the most spiritual movies there is. And it relates to this. So life being a gamble, okay, yes and no. There's aspects that are, and a lot of times it's because we don't know the laws of the universe. We don't know how to play the game. But yes, there are aspects that we'll talk about tonight that that make it very interesting. And when we learn to realize that, we're kind of, what I say is, we're in on the con. Anyone else, anything stand out? Knowing what to throw away and what to keep. Yes, and that's such a great line. The every hand's a winner and every hand's a loser. It reminds me of the Zohar, which is the sacred text linked to the Kabbalah, where they say every dream has a truth and a lie. And every aspect in life has a truth and a lie. And we have to learn to parse. It's part of understanding the game of life, is what's real and what's illusory. So that's also a concept we'll talk about tonight. Anyone else? Okay. So one of the reasons I love this song is he talks about whiskey and cigarettes and gambling and these things that we've deemed perhaps earthly or not spiritual or desirous in nature. And one of the things about the mystery of the divine is how it appears. And a lot of times what we judge as debauchery or desirous or sinful or passion and vice is actually how God or the divine is showing up to exactly present itself so that you can garner some divine wisdom. And so we're very much attracted to illusions because things enter our eyes. And if it's aesthetically pleasing or beautiful or socially acceptable, we tend to lean into those things. But oftentimes the divine shows up exactly how you don't think it should look like. And so oftentimes in the most unlikely ways, by the unlikely people and scenarios, is where we meet the gods that need to enter our psyche or be integrated into our lives. And it reminds me of one particular story from Greek and Roman mythology of Bacchus and Philemon. And it's Zeus and Mercury disguised, and everybody in the town shuts them out. And then they're finally accepted by this little old couple. And at the end of the day, when they reveal themselves that they're gods, Zeus destroys the town, but he makes this little old couple that let them in, he makes their house a castle. And so we're oftentimes, when we're seeking things in the wrong places, or we're judging certain things that we believe wouldn't be divine or godly, that's exactly where we find what we're looking for. So with that in mind, keep that as sort of an umbrella thematic or an intention of the evening when we start talking about the concept of the other. Any questions? So this is part of our shamanic initiation and depth psychology program. It's our third totem of 12. We are in the West, which is this dark area here. And the medicine and the totem that we're going to evoke this evening is the serpent. He's our first trickster of the wheel, and I'll demonstrate later a few others and how they show up and why they're necessary on a spiritual path. So first, the West. We're in the direction of the West. The West has to do with what is unchangeable in ourselves. We tend to suppress these things, hide them, because they seem to be low consciousness or unsavory. But they're not about changing and hiding and suppressing, but rather they're about integrating and accepting. So the medicine of tonight is through the trickster. We really get in touch with what we call our low-level consciousness, that sort of animal nature that we don't like to connect with, whether it's anger or pride or envy or shallowness as human beings. And that's really the invitation. Unless we start to integrate and accept that as humans, we all have this low-level consciousness. It's actually what connects us, and that's what's going to move humanity forward, then we feel separate from the other. Anytime you feel separate, whether it's lonely, whether abandoned, rejected, in a sad moment, that is the first illusion. There is no such thing as separateness. And what you're feeling separate from has become your God rather than the divine that's interconnected and available to all of us always, hence the significance of the circle. And we'll look at how all things are in the circle. We feel separate because we wear masks. We were told there were aspects of ourselves that were socially unacceptable, that we weren't perfect, our needs weren't met, and we weren't loved unconditionally. And so we started at a very young age to suppress and hide those aspects of ourselves that were deemed unlovable. And so tonight's medicine is to see how the other brings those aspects back for you to integrate and be whole, as well as to recognize that all aspects of self, when integrated and accepted, are what make you whole. And that's the goal of Trickster Gods. Any questions? So tonight, we're going to open sacred space. We're going to do some teaching. We're going to do a meditation and an activity, a creative ritual, a second meditation. Then we'll end with Q&A and closing sacred space. I'm going to open sacred space traditionally in a shamanic way, calling in the 4 directions and the totem for this evening. And I'd like for everybody, when I'm done, to say aho. That's the traditional ending to opening sacred space. For those of you who don't know, anytime you're going to engage in an intention, a ritual, a meditation, opening up, what we're going to learn today is called a tenomos or a relational field, you want to evoke that it be sacred space. And sacred space simply implies that fear, self-doubt, shame, guilt sort of be out of the space so that we can receive the intention of the teaching or the ritual or ceremony that we're engaging in. Calling in the winds of the west. Calling in the trickster gods, the serpent, to remove the illusions that we are separate from anything or anyone, and remind us of our interconnectivity to all things. Calling in the winds of the south, for the lived experiences to show us to reveal the mask in which we hide. Following the winds of the east and unified consciousness, that spirit and matter can coexist with non-dual thinking in each of us. Calling in the winds of the north, may we choose sacred tasks and ordinary tasks day in and day out to refine our spiritual discernment process. Mother Earth, thank you for providing a solid ground and animals and nature in which we can breathe and eat wholesome food. Father Sky, for the luminaries as well as the dark night, and Creator, the source of all things. Aho.
Oh.
Aho.
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 Thank you.
Oh.
Any questions about what we will do tonight? So tonight we're going to talk about a relational field that exists in all things. We're going to talk about this concept of the other. We're going to identify the archetype of the trickster and how it shows up in our lives to integrate unintegrated aspects of our psyche and how it's the archetype of change. We're going to reflect on thresholds as initiations and identify the interconnectedness of all things through a concept called mirroring. So a relational energy field. This has been proven. And science tends to follow what spiritists have known and what the sacred texts have discussed for thousands of years. But there is an energy field that pervades all things in the universe. We know it by several names. One of the names is the anima mundi, which means the soul of the world. It is a relational field in which everything, past, present, and future, is included. Sometimes we refer to it as the Akashic records. Sometimes we refer to it as a tenemos. Tenemos is a Greek term that land was reserved for the gods. It's also what we consider to be called a container if we're in a therapeutic relationship. So there's this large energetic field. Imagine this just big energy circle that we're all like a dome that we're all included in. And today we've created an additional circle in this birthday party. When you're with your children at your dinner table and your spouse, that's another relational field. And within this larger field are all these other smaller circles. And every single field, going back to this idea of pi, of all circles are equal, contain all things in it. There is no separation. So it doesn't matter the size of the field, if it's everything, or if it's just your little nucleus, or if it's you with your pet, or it's you in your favorite park. That field exists and all things are contained within that. So when we talk about fields and circles or spirals, we're talking about wholeness. We're talking about all things, the soul of the world, everything is there. This correlates to a spiritual law called the law of correspondence. As within, so without. Something is happening seemingly external. It's related to internal because we're all sharing this soul of the world. What happens in this field for us to grow spiritually is that the aspects that disturb us, I call them disturbances, and if they hit me either through a word that someone says or if I see something that's distasteful, then I recognize that is something in the field that I have yet to integrate in my personal field of my axis mundi, which I'll share with you in a moment. Two very important things are happening in this field. The way you move in the field unconsciously has to do with the way you moved in your family structure with siblings. I typically get the question, what happens if there's no siblings? Then we all have heard, first only child syndrome. And that's how those people move in the world. It's similar. So the relationship that you have with your siblings is how unintentionally or unconsciously you move in the field. And whatever comes at you that's disturbing you in the field has to do with unintegrated aspects of your psyche. We would call these shadow aspects. And these are things that either your parents did not work on, that you're left to do the work for them, or your parents said, that's not allowed here, put that away. So these things are happening in the field, whether we know it or not. And if we learn to take this information in and realize that the field is working for us, then we can become whole beings. This is also why there's no concept of an other, because all of these things are working for us and they're just aspects that haven't been fully integrated. Any questions about this?
I put one in the chat.
Elaborate the siblings.
I do, this siblings thing is interesting to me. So is it sort of, is the siblings like looking at almost like a convex mirror, maybe an exaggeration of that,
It could be.
is unintegrated? Okay.
It
And
could
how
be.
you also
Go ahead.
move in all of your other relationships?
Yes. And so the way that you move in the relationships have a lot to do with how you moved in those sibling relationships. Exactly. And it's interesting you say the word mirror. We're going to do a meditation like in a fun house sort of mirror so you can see the distortions. So that's right on point. And so when we talk about like sibling order and things like that, there's some truths to those aspects of what roles and identities we played in our family structure with siblings, with older siblings, dramatic years between siblings, that informs how we move. We don't typically understand that it's an unconscious movement, but it's how we perhaps show up in relationships and it's reflected to the siblings. For those of you studying astrology, this field is directly related to the third house. The third house is ruled by Gemini, Mercury the trickster. It's the house of siblings. And that's where you get that motion of how do I move in the world is primarily from what parents said yes and no to, the social acceptable version of you, and your siblings. So that's where that concept comes from. If you're not studying astrology, it's the same concept, but it's just an added layer of information for those of you who are playing around with your charts. So I'd like for you to close your eyes. And focus on your breath. And just take 3 deep breaths. And imagine this field around you. You can make it as big or as small as you'd like. Just get comfortable in that field. And start inviting in the beings of the past, of the present, and of the future. The animals in nature, the animal totems as symbols that you connect to. The lower consciousness versions of yourself, those you know about and those you don't. The higher consciousness versions of yourself that you currently have integrated or those yet to be integrated. Your spirit guides. Maybe bring in your favorite tree at the local park or the mountain range that you live by. Invite all of that in to your relational field. and bring all of the faces that you know that you wear, and especially invite those in that you've yet to meet. And if you can spin around in your mind's eye and see the entirety and the complexity and the layers of your being as you stand in the center of this field, just soak that all in. And invite everything in your field to be present with you this evening, preferably without judgment and self-doubt or shame. But even that is welcome if that's what's necessary for the teaching. And when you're ready, come back into your body, into your seat. Connect to your heartbeat and open your eyes. So you're now in the larger field of all things. You're in the field here with us as a group, and now you're connected to your own personal relational field. Now we're going to bring in the axis mundi, which is you as the physical container. So we want to talk about this concept of the other. And in spirituality, there is no other. And that's a spiritual law. And all things are interconnected. Again, going back to this concept of the circle and all things in that soul of the world and in the relational field. And so keep in mind that the field is working for you. It's here to provide information through a disturbance, an emotional reaction, an annoyance, joy, to indicate what needs to be perhaps looked at as a shadow aspect. And oftentimes we consider the other to be separate from us. And then we know that we're in an illusion. We know that we're an ego. We're not in the entirety of spirit, because we believe that that thing or that person is not ours. And so the field is constantly informing us to bring it back to self, bring it back to self. So have that in mind as we talk about the concepts this evening. So you only have access to wholeness and health through this concept of the other. And there is no other in spirituality. So this is pretty much the entirety of the field. This black piece is what you know about yourselves, either the roles, the identities, the faces, your personality traits. This is what you don't know. Perhaps you lack a skill in advanced mathematics, and you know what you don't know. And this little slice of the pie is pretty much your entire perspective of your being. And so all of this is your blind spots. And the only way to have access to those blind spots is through what we would consider an other, something other than this physical form in the field. If we do not reveal these parts of ourselves, if we do not come in contact with the disturbance, the judgments, and do something about it, we can get ill. So this symbol is the caduceus. As you can see, there's two serpents. And balanced, once we raise consciousness around all of our aspects, then we're living in wholeness and in integration. But that's really when we have health. Other than that, we can, unless blind spots are illuminated, we're prone to physical health, emotional illness, physical illness, spiritual illness, and so forth. In shamanism, we believe that all illness is energetic and spiritual, and so it starts here. The caduceus is a symbol for energetic medicine, And then because the energy hasn't been fully integrated, or that aspect that's unknown to us hasn't been integrated, it then becomes a physical illness in the body. So we use this concept of the other to shed light on aspects that are blind spots for ourselves so that we can become whole. So there is no other. Others, those that you would call others, are fragmented, unintegrated parts of yourself. And those others are holding your parts for you until you're ready to claim them. You were told, implied, spoken to that those aspects of you were not allowed, they were not going to be socially accepted, and they were suppressed and repressed. You learned as a little child, and your inner child heard the news that your basic needs would not be met if you showed up with those parts. So when something enters the field, and we're going to talk about the use of judgment as the connector to that, or that disturbance, we've all had sort of shocks to the system or a strong emotional reaction to maybe something we've seen on the news, that indicates that there's an aspect of the psyche that's trying through this trickster, through this other, to come out so that you can look at it, shine light on it, and then bring it internally and integrate it. So if you look at others, especially those that you dislike, especially those that you think are very different than you, whether they have different religious views, political views, as doing you a favor, as others that are holding your aspects until you're able to bring these back in, it can start to shift the relationship that you have with people that you don't necessarily care for, that your ego doesn't necessarily care for. So the circle, the outside circle, is the anima mundi. You are temporal, right? You're here embodied in time and space. Knowing that we are temporal and that we're embodied in this physical form, we have to understand one very important thing. We are limited. Anything that is incarnate, anything that is born, is limited. So you do not have access, no matter how much work you do, to all aspects of yourself. You can't do this work without this relational field constantly giving you information about what's going on inside. You don't have that full access. So once you incarnate, you have the axis mundi. So anybody come in contact with a narcissist lately? Adriana's smiling. Too many? Okay. Well, I think all of us, if you're close enough to a mirror, go take a look in the mirror. You, my friend, are a narcissist. Now, we're not talking about narcissistic personality disorder. What was that?
I'm gonna say that to you.
Oh, and yourself, right? So why are we narcissists, though? Okay, it's because of this axis mundi. We have to be centered in time and space. And so we cannot see the world through another's perspective. The field invites us to do that, and that's higher consciousness and raising of consciousness. But there's something called the hard problem of consciousness, and it's focused on this color red, right? You can't tell how I see red, and I can't tell how you see red, right? So there's a problem. Not all reds are equal. And so you have to understand that by being in the body, you are limited. You have your view based on your values, your upbringing, what enters through your senses. And so if you're the point of reference, then you're narcissistic. So again, we're not talking about the personality disorder. We're talking about that the focal point of self is here, you. You are here, you're the main event in your life. We're egocentric, we see things as they enter through our veils, our illusions, our upbringing, our culture, our society, our religion, our gender, etc., etc., etc. And so we need others and we need this field so that we can start to not only integrate aspects of ourselves that want to be revealed so that we can be whole, but so that we can live better as a humanity, and not only live better, but move humanity forward. So we have to understand that at the root, we're all narcissistic because we're embodied and because we're limited. We can't see through someone else's eyes. As we grow through this program, as we learn different spiritual techniques, we can understand that we can serve through this narcissism, but not yet. We're not there yet. This is low consciousness, and we have to start integrating our low consciousness aspects. So what you seek are parts. And anybody who's ever been around me when it comes to astrology, what's the first thing I say about an astrology chart? Sophia, what do I always say about not doing when you're looking at an astrology chart?
Can't piecemeal a chart.
Okay, so we love to say we're Enneagram 4s and we're Virgos and we have Venus and Scorpio in the first. And that is a limited perspective of the entirety, the integrated whole you. But that's how we see ourselves, as these little sections that make us special, that has, I am a Virgo, I have Venus in Scorpio, I am an Enneagram 4. And so what we seek through this axis mundi, this narcissistic limited view of ourselves, is we seek parts. We seek preferences, those areas of ourselves that not only we like and we want others to like about us as well, but we seek specialness. And so there's not much specialness when you're showing all your dirty laundry, when you're walking around town saying you're an egomaniac or you're prideful or slothful or vain. They might not be the most glamorous aspects of you. So I use the word glamour intentionally. We are enamored by glamour. We are enamored by the illusions. We're going to talk later about types of spiritual teachers. And this teaching is where we meet our first false teacher, also known as spiritual bypassing, because we're trying to avoid looking at the parts of us that aren't so special, that maybe they're just so ordinary because we're all narcissists or we're all slothful and we're all prideful. But until we really can contain our own ordinariness, then we can't really extend that out to the other. And then we're all in a game of illusions and mask wearing. So what happens is you think when there's an other that you are disconnected from this anima mundi, from this relational field of all things. And that's the first illusion. It's a trick. So when you're in the guise of the other or they, not I, or we, not them, you're already in your narcissism, you're in your ego, you're in a false self, you're wearing a mask, there's a shadow that's trying to come up, and you're separate from the exact thing that you want to be connected to, which is your divine self or the divine creator. So the way that we kind of start integrating and breaking through this false self is with tricksters. Now, most people don't like to be deceived, betrayed, backstabbed, but that's sometimes what it requires in order for us to allow integration in. And that's the vehicle. The tricksters are the vehicles in which the psyche uses to become whole. So we'll see how to use that. Any questions? So this concept of the other disturbs what you think is your stable world. When something enters that creates a disturbance at work, a new employee, a new friend that your partner starts, going on bike rides with, your child has a new best friend, this other that starts to disturb your field, this is when we start to realize that we're being challenged. There's a trickster on the scene. And you begin to talk gossip, judgments, that person, criticizing, right? All of a sudden, it doesn't fit your purview of your axis mundi. It doesn't fit the way you want things to be, the way you want life to go. That person doesn't have, or that situation doesn't have the qualities that you deem appropriate to fit into this tiny little purview that we call the ego that fits right here. For those of you who really want to pay attention to how the ego shows up, and I'll share some other words. When you're telling a story, and for those of you who have worked with me, you know that I point this out pretty quickly in a session, is when you're sharing a story, you will not believe. It was crazy. It's unbelievable. These hyperbolic words that don't fit. All this is saying is that you're in the grabs of the ego. And you're saying, this doesn't fit into my neat little tidy box of what I want life to be. And so we start with these disclaimers. These words let you know that there is a shadow aspect that wants to come in. And therefore, that other is just going to get stronger and stronger and stronger because it's got to beat down that limited view that you have of the world. So when you start paying attention to your language and how you talk about something that doesn't fit neatly into your box, that's going to be for you like a red flag to say, oh, I'm in the grabs of the other, of the ego. I'm disconnected from the divine. A trickster is going to show up to teach me a lesson here. Let me get ahead of it. So this is where in the song it says, every hand's a winner and every hand's a loser. When we invite others in that destabilize our seemingly stable system, we can gain from that. Doesn't mean that we don't have to lose something. What we lose, hopefully, is this nonsense stable life that feels safe and secure, and it's really just rooted in fear. So when things enter the field that are disturbing, that seem as an other, that don't match your way of living in the world, then know that an aspect that's been suppressed, and through that judgment of that person or that situation, something is trying to come to light. So I just want to specify, because we're going to do an activity later, the word stable does not mean good. The word stable simply means in spirituality something that you have done so repeatedly that it's just your pattern. There's very unstable patterns. So it can be being late all the time to appointments. It can be wasting money. It could be a really great habit that you have of exercising every day, but maybe it's too rigid because you never give yourself a break. So stable does not mean positive or negative. It simply means something that's routine, that you're mechanical at, and that is what you built your foundation on. That is already indicating that it's ego, that it's limited, it's part of that axis mundi that wants to broaden to allow other things in so that you can live more integrated and whole. So let's talk about the field and how to interact with it. The field here is you at the center of the field, and all things work according to you. Here, you might identify someone as the other, and you do not invite them in. There's judgments, they're viewed as separate. Maybe they're a danger. Maybe they have annoyed you, irritated you, gossiped about you, and you see them as separate and perhaps a danger to that stability. Sometimes you interact with the field and you allow someone new into your friend group. You allow someone in, that joined your circle at work, or a new TV show that you've entered in, and you've allowed it into the field, but it's still viewed as other and separate. Ideally, and this is the goal, is that everything in the field, it comes back to you, that you start to realize that there is a connection of something seemingly outside that's related to something inside. It takes me back to this law of correspondence that I mentioned earlier. As within, so without. So really this thing that's seemingly external or outside that has entered is simply an aspect of yourself that wants to be returned back to you. And this person, for instance, has been holding this aspect and says, when you're ready, here is, let's say, your selfishness or your ego or your laziness back, whatever the judgment is. And we'll talk more about judgments. The serpent as the totem of this class is dissatisfied with anything other than wholeness. So the serpent is one of those totems that resembles duality. We see duality when we speak in terms of good, bad, right, wrong, always, never. Anytime you use those words in your vocabulary, you're in a field that is going to start to pressurize so that you can move into more non-dual thinking or merging these opposites. And so the trickster is going to enter in some way. And so what we're trying to do is achieve wholeness. So the serpent, this one here that's swallowing its tail, is called the Urobos. This means that you've gone full circle to recognize that what's on the outside is on the inside. And now you have a relationship with it. Here you have no relationship. Here you have a distant relationship, but you still in none of these identify that that is you. The other or the different thing or the disturbance is really you. Here you recognize that the entirety of the field is giving you information to say, oh, I need to look at that, and that is how I relate to myself or to others or how I move in the field. I mentioned at the beginning that the trickster has to do with the number 3. When triangles are involved in something like love triangles, or there's a number 3, we are immediately in trickster territory. And in the Bible, Jesus says that when 3 gather in my name, that he's going to work miracles. And because the trickster is very misunderstood, it's personified chaos. It brings deceit. It brings betrayal. It shakes up a seemingly stable foundation that we would never assume is the face of God, but indeed is how the divine shows up, so that you can get out of this ego stability of something safe and secure that's really just fear, so that you can have a miracle. So we see things in patterns of 3. If you've repeated something 3 times already, even if it's seemingly different, but there's a little flavor of it, that means you're in the pattern that soon the trickster will appear to hopefully push you over the edge so that you can finally integrate the concept. Or something can come and really be life-shattering for you to look deeper and realize that this needs to shift. If not, you're going to be sick. As we said before, these darker parts or these psychic parts that have been suppressed and repressed want to come to the light. So we usually have these relationships in the field. And so just take a moment and see how you have an other with someone, perhaps that you keep at an arm's distance, or someone that is in your field, but there's still an annoyance or a disturbance or a judgment about. I want to specify something. If your earthly safety is at risk, that's priority. You can do this work, not being in physical proximity to anything or anyone that is unsafe, that harms you physically. These concepts are to be done internally in your journaling, in your contemplation, in your spiritual life, the way that you work with yourself, your shadow, your inner child, your therapist. So I just want to be clear that no way do we need to go into an area that is unsafe for us physically, but we can still extract the teaching from what that situation or that person is trying to provide for us so that we can grow internally. Any questions? Okay, next we're going to talk about the trickster archetype. So the serpent is not the only trickster. We see the monkey in Eastern medicine. We see a coyote. We see fox. There's many stories, myths, fairy tales of trickster archetypes. And so the one for our program is the serpent. So there are many stories of the serpent or the snake. We see that it sheds. So it's part of that shedding of the illusions and the veils. There's a story with Moses that he's not sure if he's seeing a serpent or a staff. And so it's this optical illusion of, am I seeing what I just saw? And so we start to create some doubt. Sometimes we say, are we crazy? Did I just experience that? This is so out of what we would seem and deem normal to someone's life. And so we see these stories repeated in mythology and fairy tale and in story so that we can start connecting with this archetype. They tend to have a deceitful nature, a comedic nature, a playful, youthful nature that tends to be archetypally what the trickster is like. Think of the court jester or the Joker. I'm going to play you a little clip from the movie The Mask with Jim Carrey, in which he's possessed, so to speak, by this trickster archetype. So the moment a trickster appears on the scene, the moment that you recognize this is a trickster archetype, be prepared because some chaos in your life is going to ensue. And the goal is to recognize that there's some change on the horizon, that you're being invited over a threshold that we'll talk about later, to take a leap so that you can change something that's very stable and egotistical, false self and inauthentic mask that you're wearing so that you can invite a broader version of yourself in. So I'd like to do a little meditation. I see a question. Oh, Suzanne, there's the ways you're going to see, and we're going to do an activity with words. So I don't want to kind of spoil that right now, but they have a humor, youthful, playful style about them. They may be very chaotic. They're comedic. They're jokesters, gamblers, things like that. They have this perhaps chaotic or non-traditional flair to the way that they show up in your field that starts to get you in touch with perhaps discarded aspects of yourself that you would judge, that you think might be cute in them, but you wouldn't want to perhaps embody that nature. And we'll do an activity with words shortly. So everybody close your eyes. We're going to do a guided meditation to connect to some trickster archetype words and sentiments. So make sure that you're seated firmly in your chair. Send your breath to your lungs, to your chest, and to your hands. The trickster rules the chest area, the lungs, the hands, and the nervous system. So send all the breath to those areas. You can connect fully to the trickster we're going to invite in. And in your mind's eye, a door emerges. And slowly start walking closer to the door. And as you walk over the threshold of the door, it starts to get very dark. And take 3 steps in, and you're going to find yourself in a dark cave. You can stay standing, you can walk around, or you can take a seat in the cave. Just get comfortable in the cave. And I'm going to say some words, and those words are going to appear on the cave walls. And if any of the words, one or more, stand out, Keep a mental note of anything that creates a disturbance or discomfort when you hear the words. Hidden secrets. Liars, cheaters, love triangles, betrayal, dishonesty, chaos, clowns, gamblers, jokers, gossip, school bullies, bad academic achievement, immaturity, portals, intrigue, siblings, and lies. So connect to one or as many words on the wall. If you need to go up to the cave wall and take down the words and put them in your pocket, you can hold them in your hand, or you can just keep them in your mind. If you're seated in the cave, you can stand up as we're going to start exiting. You're standing, take 3 steps forward, and the door appears once again. You're going to stand at the threshold of the door. Do not exit just yet. Turn back around and retrieve one more word from the cave wall. Once you have that word, return to the door, walk outside, connect fully back to your body. Feel yourself secure in your seat, in your axis mundi. Fully present, take a few breaths. And when ready, open your eyes. Does anyone want to share what word they went back for?
I went back for sibling and lie. Sibling was the only word. I had a negative reaction in my belly to all the words except for sibling.
So tell me about the reaction to the word lie.
It was also a negative feeling. Because it was one of the last words you heard, it was just there in my mind, and yeah,
Where
it's
did
what
you feel it?
in my belly.
In your belly? Okay.
Mhm.
So my invitation to you, the 3rd chakra, the belly area. The belly area is oftentimes the unspoken story. Perhaps there's an unspoken story with your sibling, although he and the word didn't necessarily impact you negatively. Perhaps there's a relationship there based on a lie, built on a lie, something that robs your identity, or perhaps the role in which you relate to him could bring some light and honesty too. So that belly area is oftentimes the unspoken story, and it's linked to identity and self-worth. It's the fire element, the fire for illumination. So perhaps in your journaling, go a little deeper about perhaps the way that he lives versus you do, if there's judgments, what lies are woven in the story, perhaps of what your parents, the way they treated you versus him, and start seeing if you can connect those dots in that field. The younger you can go, the better. And one of the things I recommend is when you're doing your inner work, close your eyes. First memory that you have of lying with your brother, to your brother, a lie from your brother, the first thing that enters, and start constellating the field from that space.
Thank you.
Okay, I see some comments. Adriana, dishonesty and betrayal. What did you feel? What
I didn't
happened when
feel
you heard
anything
those
when you were
words?
talking about all the words. It just nothing major, just something clicked. Something said, "Oh, that's the word."
Okay, did you feel
For
it
some.
anywhere specifically? Even if it was the most subtle thing.
Where did I feel it? My chest, maybe,
In your chest? Okay,
not the belly.
okay.
Yeah,
So more of like,
maybe. It's
okay,
subtle, so tiny.
okay. So I said that the divine is found in the strangest places, right? When we talk about, poker, drinking, gambling, and so forth. It's also the way that the field speaks to us. If the field is divine, it's all divine intelligence. If the field is God itself, we need to pay attention to the subtlety. This isn't going to be, sometimes it is, but it's rare, to be a roar. It's going to be these subtle things that enter where you hear dishonesty and betrayal. And the logical question is, where am I being dishonest and where am I self-betraying? We start at us. We start at the axis mundi, okay? And so then we can go out and see. But we really have to orient ourselves to that temporal time and space that it is here, that is coming in to educate and to reveal something in me. And that's a discomfort. And so when people come to develop intuition, one of the first things I say is, what's the first thing you get? 3 to 5 seconds. Don't judge it. First thing. Why? Because that's usually that field speaking to you. Then you can start parsing it and asking it questions and having a relationship with it. But the first thing where you feel it, if you have education about the physical body and it's held in a specific part of the body or chakra, what's the function of that organ? What's the function of that chakra? And that starts to add more information to the information, in this case, dishonesty and betrayal that's entering. So perhaps in the heart chakra, which is where Adriana felt it, or the chest, what's the function of the chest or the lungs or breath, etc. Let's see what else. Okay, Halida. Dishonesty, liar, clown. Tell me about the clown.
I don't know. That was so interesting because you said clown and then you said gambler. And I felt immediately like clown, like, ugh. And then gambler, I was like, yeah, it's fine, whatever. It was so, and I know like my Fiona, my daughter, hates clowns. And she, she's like traumatized by some sort of kid fiesta thing when she was little at preschool. And I've never, I don't know. It was really interesting that I think it's the mask, the false face, which is together with liar, which was the word that gave me the biggest. There were some words like I forgot even that you said sibling. um, it's really interesting. So I don't know why it jumped out at me, but it was interesting to see how different words really resonate and other compared to others.
So when we start sharing a story, the moment we make it personal, there's something, and I invite you to look at this. You talk about your daughter, and she's talking about this fiesta at school where I guess she was traumatized, and false faces and masks. You've associated in the psyche your own falseness as a mother. There's a mask there, right? Bad mother. And so immediately when we start with a story, there it is. It starts to constellate. The field shows up in the story. So my invitation to any of you that are thinking of a story of why is to ask yourself the definition in one sentence of the clown, and or even a better question is, what don't I like about the clown? In one sentence, because that removes the story and you get right to the seed of what's trying to be illuminated in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So any of you can do this with any of your shares. So I'm going to bring up this, and you'll get the slide deck. Again, similar. Just look at the slide deck and see what words immediately, 3 to 5 seconds, just pop out. And it may be the ones the same as the ones that I said, but now you're looking at them. See if any of them.
I have a legitimate question because I
Sure.
just had this conversation with somebody. Yeah. So I noticed in the chat, just like we were talking about, that like clowns have a tendency of making a lot of people uncomfortable, and a lot of people don't like them. But I love clowns. I actually went back to get it because of like, oh yeah, okay. Like I
But can I make
genuinely enjoy. Yeah, make your comment. I'm asking you the question.
okay, I'm going to make a comment because I'm your mother. And to you, your siblings are your gods. And your sibling, Stephen, adores the book It, which is a clown. And so the story that's constellating, and there may be other layers, I'm just saying the first sort of personal attachment to that, since that was a very important thing in our house, is that there's a positive connotation there.
Right.
So you see siblings and you see clown, right? And it has to do with a book, which is stuff you do in school. So it constellated positive. So maybe that isn't the shadow aspect. There could be something behind it. There might be something about a clown that you don't like. And if it's positive, then usually that suggests that you've integrated it as an endearing part of yourself. We're looking for the things that create a disturbance. And that's really where the growth happens. So does anyone want to share a word that popped out when you hidden secrets?
From
Is that
this
when
list?
you saw that, Suzanne?
That was Hidden Secrets and Liars. Hidden Secrets definitely popped out when that word was said.
Where do you
So,
feel that?
I actually felt like tightness in my face.
In your face?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So,
Okay. Do you feel that you show the entirety of your face, or that your face perhaps puts on whether it's a gesture, or maybe it's you look younger than what you are? Is there a secret that you can see that the face can be manipulated to hide something that no one would know unless they got deeper and internally, knew more about your internal space?
well, it actually came up a few nights ago, and even during this, just for a brief moment when we were in, like the cave, is that I've had people comment that know me well that I often look, yes, younger, but that I look sad. I look sad, and I do think there's a lot of secrets in my family, and but it came up actually even this week that I look sad. Like I remember I've heard that multiple times in my life. And I kind of hide my face a little bit. Like I don't feel comfortable with my appearance.
And one other question,
So there's
does your
that.
face remind you of your parents?
Perhaps a little, yeah. Even though I don't look, I'm the only green-eyed strawberry blonde in my family on both sides. So
Okay, so that's another secret, right? That you don't physically perhaps share the same characteristics as the family, and that can be that you can hide things because your appearance isn't the same as theirs, or your face isn't the same. So we want to do some excavation, if you will, right? Certain things aren't literal. So this sheet, and you can do this, you can do this with any archetype, and you can do this with any word. Words carry energy, and we're going to talk a little bit about paying attention to what we say. But when Jung was interviewing clients or patients, he would rattle a list of words, and they would respond whatever the question was, or repeating the words. And if he noticed even the slightest, it could have been a split second of a wait before they said the word or answered, he knew that there was some shadow aspect that was suppressed, or was not integrated yet. And so you can do this when you have sheets of papers. For instance, if you're trying to find out your values, you can print out values list and see, are there words that really resonate, that come out, that say, oh wow, I wish I had that, but I'm not that. So these are other ways. Remember, everything's in the field. In the Franciscan tradition, there's something called Lectio Divino, where you can read a passage of scripture or a poem, and one or two words that carry energy almost pop out, and that can be your contemplative practice. So it can go both ways. We're trying to connect to our trickster, our shadow, our unintegrated psychic parts. So we want to lean more into the darker pieces, but it's an activity that, if it creates any sort of jarring or even subtle effect to your field, you know that there's something there to look at deeper. Disorienting events give you discomfort. Yes. And you're my control freak Virgo. That makes perfect sense. So let's disorient. Who wants to sign up for the job? Yet when I met you, I was as disoriented as anybody. And you jumped in, so you're not that afraid of it. So language, the language we use is our first trickster. So when I'm working with someone or talking to someone, the first thing I'm listening for is that word that sort of is like, oh, it's like energy concentrated in a word choice. And so the moment you start recognizing that you're using a real word that has a lot of energy, it could be a negative descriptor of yourself or an other. It could, for instance, disorganizing or chaotic events, right? We're already in the grabs of the trickster. So when energy from the cosmic consciousness enters to create our limiting thoughts, it's already a drop in consciousness. Remember, the trickster, the serpent, is low-level consciousness. Low-level consciousness is our human nature, our desirous animal human nature, that we're all selfish and narcissistic egomaniacs. So the words that come from those thoughts are spoken, and they already carry a very low vibration. Anything that is spoken already reduces consciousness, even if it's wisdom. And so when we start to pay attention to how we speak about ourselves or the seeming other, we are creating that exact thing. And so when we pay attention to the words that carried energy, chaos, liar, betrayal, it tells us that there's a discomfort, and that there's probably a story and or most likely a judgment around the word that resonated with you. So when you're doing your sort of journaling or your contemplative time, think about the work, and like Halida did, go to the story, the first story that emerges. Why? The first story that emerges, the first memory, if it could be from your youth, great. The younger, the better, because then you're going more to the origin. But even if it was last week, the reason is that once it starts to create disturbance in the field, you've decided that it's personal. The field is the world soul. It is not personal. It is there to inform you of something you are taking personal. And the moment you can find a story, even if it seems to be the most rando story from a TV show or something from 6 years ago, there's still a personal attachment. And that's sort of how you can sort of deconstruct why this is an aspect that wants to emerge and bring light to. So the words are the original forms of your limitations, your judgments about yourself. And even if the words are about the other, they're in fact reflexive and they're about yourself. Key phrases to watch. I am that. I'm always that, right? I am so neat. I'm never dirty. I'm always on time. Those type of phrases. I am not that, or I am never. I could never do that in gossip, in judgment, in watching a character on television. Those words carry so much energy that they're letting you know that indeed that aspect of you is suppressed. And the problem with suppressing and repressing aspects of our psyche is that our inner child is constantly getting the message that he or she is not enough because of that thing. And that's the exact thing that wants to come out so that you can grow your inner child up. So by default, what our parents told us was not acceptable, what our parents said would not get our needs met or love, what our parents said they didn't want to be seen in the house, those characteristics, is exactly how we're parenting our inner child. And we can see the vicious cycle. So the field is constantly telling you, especially if there's a narrative or a story, that the inner child is struggling with that and wants to be liberated from that judgment, even if it's seemingly about an other person. So that's when you're most separate from your divine self, your higher self, your inner child, and the field of the divine intelligence or the cosmic consciousness or God or whatever word you feel comfortable using. If a word evokes a disturbance, especially if there's an emotion, even if it's a subtle emotion, it's unintegrated, you've taken it personally, there's work to do. Spit it out. Okay. So, the totem of serpent is about optical illusions. We are very enamored by the illusory, what looks good. This is very deceiving. Our eyes are very deceiving. And so when we start to remove veils that we see in others and in ourselves, we start to see much clearer. But one of the biggest tricks is that it looks good. It's too good to be true, or it's something that exactly what you have on your list, let's say, when you're itemizing a partner that you're seeking or the job, that you fail to see the blind spots. And so when the judgments begin in that seemingly perfect situation, that's what's going to inform you of what wants to come to light and to truth that's hidden behind the perfection and the veils. The serpent is also low level consciousness. If you think of the slithering nature of the serpent, that's how it moves in the world. It's like on the grass. In our shaman tree, we saw bear and we saw crow were below in the roots. Serpent is the first animal that's on the grass. And so if it's slithering and it's on its belly, it's linked to the low consciousness of our own lower nature. And if we look at our body as a tree, the axis mundi, or our chakra, or our Kabbalistic tree, any of these spiritual traditions have an imagery of a tree or hierarchy. We're still in the lower realms. We're in the lower chakras when it comes to the serpent. And it's because we are disconnected from that reality of ourselves that we feel separate. We think that this is a punishment reward system. It's a very unfortunate thing that has happened in our psyches linked to spirituality. Only if we're good, only if we're pure, only if we're deserved will we get the grace and mercy of the divine. And nothing is further from the truth. And the serpent is to remind us, no matter how many tricks, no matter how much we bypass, no matter how many illusions we fall prey to, we're still deserved of the grace and mercy of the divine. And the field is constantly working to inform us. And if it was personal and it didn't like you and it was mad at you, you would not get that relationship and that information reciprocated consistently if there was a problem or you were being judged for being impure. And so the totem reminds us that it's in our impurities, it's our desirous nature, it's our low-level consciousness, it's our wildness, it's our passions, it's our sinful self. That is exactly why we deserve the grace and mercy of the divine and why the relational field is consistently communicating with us. When we're at the center of ego and personality, we feel separate from this, and we're too much in pain to try anything new because fear is running the show. When we're connected to the field and we're allowing it, we're realizing that it's just uncovering aspects of ourselves. We're connected more to that soul. We feel more vulnerable. We're more open to exposing ourselves because we realize that our life, breadth, and depth is going to expand if we get out of our narrow thinking of good and bad. Anything you feel separate from. So if you still believe in an other, when you're judging this week, when you're gossiping this week, even if you're judging about yourself, then that is considered your little God. That is your ego. And that's what's calling the show. Then you're wearing a mask. You're in your small self with a lowercase s, and you're not authentic. And so what we want to do is raise consciousness about our nature. The only way to raise consciousness, and then you start to see the serpents in a lot of mythologies. You see that in the Caduceus, you see the medicine of serpent raised. When the serpent is raised and not slithering, it's gaining consciousness around our lower nature. And now we can see ourselves more whole and more fully. And so you see a lot in spiritual traditions, this raised serpent up and down like the spinal column or the kundalini. You see this in mythology. That means that we've gained consciousness around our lower nature. Serpents are also dragons and snakes. So it's, and dinosaurs, that kind of archetype that we see. Iguanas. Where I'm in Florida, we see iguanas all the time. When you see those types of animals, those are the animals in this archetype. That they're unintegrated aspects of the psyche that want to be raised out of the dark cave and into the light. But imagining yourself as those parts that the other is holding for you causes a lot of pain. There's usually a story where you lost something. Maybe you lost respect. Maybe you were embarrassed and shamed. Maybe the kids at school bullied you. But there's usually a story that is attached to why it's not possible for you to bring that aspect of yourself forward. And the trickster will repeatedly, continuously show it in the field, in your story, in your patterns, in anything that you're living to show you it's okay, it's safe, bring it out, bring it out, bring it out. And once you identify something 3 times, recognize not only that it's a pattern, but that the trickster is saying it's time to bring illumination to it because you're in delusion about yourself. Any questions? So for those of us that are old, you'll remember cassette tapes. And if not, imagine, I don't know, a VHS or something. Maybe that's not any better, but close your eyes and imagine a cassette tape in your player or Blockbuster, Be Kind, Rewind. And I want you to press the rewind button on your cassette player. And press rewind and let it take you back to a moment where you had certainty. You were so sure of something in your life or someone in your life, something that you were sure that you knew was the best thing for you, or you were different, or you were special, or you were not that. And connect to that situation. See where you feel that in your body. What story emerges? And hold that old version of you for a few seconds. And now bring it to the moment where it all crumbled, where you realize that that was a lie, perhaps a relationship, a friendship, your family foundation as a child. This disorienting event felt like you were topsy-turvy. You didn't know what was up or what was down. And connect to that disorientation. See if you can connect to where you feel that or hold that in the body. And now go back up to your cassette player and press fast forward to today. And connect to the relationship that you now have with that belief or that person or that relationship or that concept that at one time was so certain and stable, was shattered, and the newfound breath and range and wisdom after the fact. What do you now know about it that's different from the origin of that event? Bring that into the present. Connect to that in your body. And when you're fully in your seat, take a few breaths and open your eyes when you're ready. So who would like to share where you were before your disorienting event, perhaps what happened, and where you are now? What changed? What new stability or new truth about yourself did you gain? Anyone?
Francis?
Yes.
Well, I was struggling because I was thinking, when have I ever felt sure of anything? Ugh, like I feel like I don't know when. I mean, like how young was I? And then I realized that the thing that shattered for me recent was stories that I told myself, or that maybe I didn't tell them to or I didn't realize that I was telling myself the stories. That was just the story of this is who I am, told to me by my family. So, and I realized very recently, like, oh, that's not what it was. It was this other thing. It wasn't about me and my qualities as a human. It was about what I was going through. So that was my disorienting event, was sort of like a restructuring of like this story, narrative, identity I had thought about myself.
Okay, so thank you for that. So one of the things, and it's free on my website if anyone wants to download it, I call it my psychological X-ray. A psychological X-ray is just a few questions, good and bad aspects of mother and father. But the main questions are, how were you described as a child? And how would you describe yourself as a child? The way that you were described, I call this the prophecy. It's like the gods had a prophecy, right? Narcissus had a prophecy and Oedipus had a prophecy. We also had a prophecy. And as these disorienting events enter and they unravel, we realize, oh, they described me as such, and I've honored that script. And usually it's post 40. So for those of you that are younger, although time is going rapidly in the age of Aquarius, everything's changing. We start to realize, oh, that was just said about me, but that's not really who I am. Oh, that's been a script I've been honoring, but that's not really who I am. And it seems as if you're in this sort of unraveling process of the sweater or the prophecy that was sort of placed on you, the cloak, right? You will be this. And now you're really starting to discover more of that authentic self. That's exactly the function of these disorienting events. Oftentimes, they feel like we have no time, place, we have no which way is up or down. And uncertainty is one of the big words for those. I don't know anything. And it could be a big move, it could be a changing of school, it could be a death of a parent. It doesn't always have to be that dramatic, but they really start to get you to question, who am I? And it seems as if you've done that. Thank you. So these disorienting events are led by trickster gods. They're the gods that are kind of nudging you, whether you know it or not. Again, it's chaos personified, as Craig Chalquist describes that archetype, to nudge you to jump over the hill. You know, your parents would say, if your friend told you to jump off a hill, would you? You know, that's the kind of voice in your head that the trickster occupies. So usually what these events do is that they make us look at ourselves differently in a broader context. We realize that we're more than what we were told. We realize we're more than or different than or inclusive of things that aren't so small and boxed in, but we gain some breadth and perspective about ourselves. So now we have more breathing room. I mentioned before when I was saying the words to bring in the breath to your chest and your hands. The trickster gods rule your hands and this area of the chest. So when you have, whether it's congestion or asthma or tightness in the chest or an anxiety, that's a trickster god that's trying to say, surrender to what you think you are. Can we breathe into or broaden our view of this event that's uncertain, allow that in? And so getting on the other side of it. And there's a quote, and I know I'm going to mess it up. It's that God wants to give us so much, but our hands are so full because we're so attached and holding. We won't let go to allow all of the gifts and all of the grace and mercy that is provided. And so the trickster almost like wants you to let go because you're just so startled with all the chaos so that you can actually receive the larger gifts or the greater gifts that are yours. So the tricksters create chaos and disorienting events to show you that indeed that thing that you thought you were not or never would be or never could do actually is in relationship to you pretty solidly, and you can invite it in. One of my sayings is judgments are confessions and they're great. The more you judge the other, the more you judge people, places, things, situation, the more you're in touch with these unintegrated aspects, the better, the healthier, the easier to grab those aspects, that content, to bring into your field so that you could start having a relationship with it. This is all about relationship. And so those people that rub you the wrong way, bother you, those are the greatest teachers, because in one sentence, what don't I like about it? You can already decipher what it is that you're telling your inner child you don't like about him or her, and what you don't like about yourself, and a mask that you're wearing. Any questions before we go on to thresholds? So thresholds are initiations. When we're being initiated into a spiritual path, into a life cycle like motherhood or grandparent or retirement, these are thresholds. And there's a trickster on the scene at all times, because they are going to be associated with change, with probably unorthodoxy, with instability, with a dual thinking that has to change to something else. It allows you to broaden your view of this thing, because you're now having a relationship with it and you probably prior did not. And they initiate you because they're destabilizing. And so we're going to talk about the serpent in particular and the other ones on the shaman wheel. So this is the concept of the medicine wheel that we use in shamanism. Let me first say that if you Google medicine wheel, there's going to be these 4 sections and these 4 colors, but they will not always be in the same spaces. So it's very particular to different traditions, but these are the 4. They're linked to the cardinal directions. They have different totems, different life stages. The one that we use at Hidden Truths is this one. So this is the West, this is the South, this is the East, and this is the North. Anytime you have a cardinal direction here, there is a threshold or a trickster god. So here we're moving from serpent into owl. That's going to start next month. Then we're going to have otter into wolf. So that'll be our next threshold god or trickster god. Then we're going to have beaver into deer, and that's going to initiate us into the north. And then salmon is going to bring us back into bear, and it's cyclical. And the circle goes around and around and around. So the tricksters are at each of those thresholds. So anytime you're at a door, a gateway, a portal, you're literally inviting in a trickster god, physically in the physical realm. And we're going to do a little creative activity about it. So thresholds are ruled by tricksters. This is Hermes or Mercury. He has winged sandals. He is a god that is allowed in the Greek pantheon, the only god that's allowed to go to the upper world and to the lower world. He's allowed to go high to Olympus and down to Hades. And when there's threshold doorways, portal, gateways, when they're tricksters, disorienting events, that's what it feels like. People will say, like, I died and came back. I started today by saying I was dead. And then I came back from that event. And now here I am celebrating my birthday because I realized there's a new life cycle. There's a new thing to live. And so oftentimes it doesn't have to be that dramatic. There's this newfound energy for creation, desire to put something out, teach something, yell it on the rooftops. I understand something now that I didn't before this event. And so the tricksters allow us to reach the heights of our divinity and see our potential and see the grace and mercy of all of this, but also take us to the lowest of lows, which is where these unintegrated psyche aspects are at the bottom of the ocean, or the underworld, the depths of our psyche, so that we can bring them, look at them, integrate them, and now we have raised consciousness. So these tricksters have this capacity to keep us unstable because of this ability of them to take us to high places and low places. And you can see that in the serpent, in the way that it moves. So in the shaman program, we use the hero's journey and all of the steps on the journey with the totems that we use. So tonight we're on serpent, and here says Nereus and Busiris, and I'll briefly share that. So where you see threshold, that's an opportunity to jump. On the spiritual path, most people stay here. They have some event, they realize that they're awakened, or there's an awakening, there's an interconnectedness, there is a field, there's something really cool about this world, but they stay safe. I assume that that's going to be changing as we enter the age of Aquarius and more people are seeking this. I mean, just the other day, the gentleman who invented the term biohacker, which is all about physical, is now having an Akashic Records reader on his show. So these themes, astrology is the religion of age of Aquarius, right? These themes are on people's tongues and mouths and thoughts. So I think we're going to see more of this. But for the most part, people have been awakened to knowing that there is something. But then they stay kind of safe. This is known as the ordinary world. I like to visit. I like to kind of see, oh, it's cool to have intuition, crystals and whatnot. That's okay. But that isn't real sort of raising of consciousness. And so the tricksters show up at these threshold spaces. Here, Wolf is helper because another teacher shows up. Deer is atonement. That's when we realize, oh, we're just like that other. And we come back home and we say, oh, I've learned something. And now I want to spread the teaching to my children, to my lover, to my friends, to my business. And so this is round and round how we go with all of these totems and archetypes. And the spiritual path has this theme and this sort of, they're not steps because it's not linear, but it has a pattern. The first liminal space. Liminality is when you're not really sure where you are. Are you touching the solid ground, or are you on more softer, watery, sand at the beach, right? Where that liminal space where the water and the sand touch. So the tricksters invite a liminal space. When you see things that you're not sure, there's gray, there's a paradox. You really can't grab something stable. You're in the grabs of a trickster. Jump, jump, jump. But just like the song says, every hand's a winner and every hand's a loser. You gotta make sure that you're not jumping into the lie. Like the Zohar says, every dream has a truth and a lie. That's the harder work to do because that requires self-reflection. So what do we find? At these moments, specifically at this first threshold, we find our first false teacher. Every single person will participate in some version of spiritual bypassing, thinking they're woke, thinking they're awakened, thinking they've raised consciousness. They love all of humanity. They found a teacher that supports that. That is known as a busiris. That person with illusion and glamour and some form of spiritual bypassing, it's necessary. This is an absolute necessity in the spiritual path. It's a pitfall so that you can start to recognize you have everything you need within. You need others as reflections. You need others for mirroring. You need others so that you can say, oh, I am that. They are not separate from me. But we tend to fall into the grabs of a busiris, a false spiritual teacher that keeps us enamored and wrapped in so that we continue to have self-doubt. We're not enough. Our intuition, we need to pay them, etc., etc., etc. None of that is true. We do need teachers on the path. We oftentimes need to get out of our own way because we're too emotionally attached to what is going on. That is different. So this is also part of the trickster. That oftentimes, because we're not on solid ground, we're not sure anymore of what's right and what's left, what's up and what's down, that we tend to also attract tricky characters. And in the spiritual realm, the first false teacher appears. For those of you in the shaman program, the myth of the Garden of Hesperides speaks to the two teachers. Nereus, on the other hand, is the teacher that provides discernment, that provides wisdom, just small information, nudges you in the right direction, says, okay, and maybe perhaps extends you to the next step of your journey, but doesn't rob your power, does not coerce you, does not keep you tied up, enamored, thinking that the spiritual path is crystals and sage, because it's not. The spiritual path is about jumping this threshold, and this is all shadow. This is all the relational field that's in the cave, all of those words that created discomfort. 80% of the spiritual path is this. And so if we don't take the jump, the tricksters show up as lying, cheating, stealing characters in our story. Someone stole your husband, someone stole your car, someone cheated on their taxes, you got caught. We know the stories. That's because the field kept hitting you and hitting you and hitting you and hitting you, and you ignored it and you ignored it and you ignored it. And finally it cracks open to help you, to serve you, send you some trickster in the guise. Remember, God shows up in mysterious ways. And now you have to confront this thing to organize your finances, to get your health in order. And that's the mystery of the spiritual path. So the tricksters, they're necessary. They're not going anywhere. And know that there's a very strong teaching when a trickster shows up in your life. And those words that I read and that are on that sheet, lie, cheat, steal, betray, deceit, those are the main ones. That when that starts to constellate in your life and you start to notice those are the words you're using to describe a situation, a person, a scenario, you're in a trickster territory. So watch out that you don't get enamored by the ease of it and bring that information internally so that you can grow. Any questions? So thresholds.
Wait, I have a question.
Yes.
What if it seems that like you're constantly surrounded by tricksters and like you invite these types of people into your life, but not necessarily in a like weary kind of threatening way? Like you enjoy people who are of this nature.
Okay, so some people are just natural tricksters. That's their primary archetype, right? So there are 12 archetypes, and some people just really are tricksters. That's their primary archetype, right? The gambler, salesman, that type of thing. You know, someone that's always like robbing Peter to pay Paul, that kind of energy. So that's just an archetype that can be just very constellated in you. That could be generational, ancestral, in your own psyche, that you're comfortable in those types of environments. Maybe there's a lot of strength in you, that person, those traits that are strong in you. But if you're constantly surrounded by tricksters, there is something in you that is trying to transform. Why? The shadow archetypes of the trickster are the magician and the sage. And if you don't upgrade your consciousness and you just stay, even if it's not seemingly dangerous, and you don't transform, the magician archetype is transformative. It's to transmute something, raise consciousness, kill the old so that the new can emerge. And then from that new thing, you become the sage. You take that magic, you take that wisdom that you have, that seed, and you become the sage. It almost like leads you to your vocation. It leads you to your purpose in life. That tends to be what happens, is that we stay at the low consciousness. Oh, this is fun. Life's great. And then we don't maximize our potential. And so if you're seeing that, there's going to be judgments in those people. Of course, you can do that, that reflexive act of what don't I like about it, and where do I have this? But go further. There's something that's saying transform, be the magician of your own life. The magician archetype means you have everything inside of you. Make alchemy from it. So take the trickster and alchemize it to high consciousness. And from that, now you've been given your life's purpose as the sage. Does that help? So in the Jewish tradition, we use something called the mezuzah. And here's an image, and it has a prayer inside, and we put it at all the doors, all the doorways. It's believed that the doorways are where the tricksters, oftentimes called the devils or evil spirits, kind of hang out. And so because it's a threshold, because there's a door, the mezuzah is there as a protective effect. Now, that's the negative connotation. If you're going to open a door, to walk out of it, to move into a world, to change something, go to work, right? You're also letting things in. So if we're going to open the door to something because we're going to expand consciousness, we have to see what shadow or what's behind it, right? That we're also letting in. So it goes back to that song, every hand's a winner, every hand's a loser. Every dream has a truth, every dream has a lie. It's the paradox of spirituality that everything in the field isn't good or bad, it just is. And so we're going to do an activity with mezuzah now. So if you have your piece of paper and pen, take it out. If you don't, grab it. And what you're going to do is you're going to, on your paper, draw a triangle. So I said at the beginning that there's 3 symbols in the entire universe. Basically can be boiled down to circles, triangles, and squares. Circles are spirit. Triangles are thoughts. And squares are the material world or anything that is earthly material that can die. That's pretty much all of spirituality. And that's from a law called the law of octaves. The only way to upgrade consciousness, the only way to go from one circle to the next circle, one level of consciousness to the next, using the field and integrating all of the things in the field so it no longer affects us or that we've shifted consciousness somehow, is we must engage in the triangle. Because the number one trick we have, I tell you, is our language, and language comes from thoughts. All thoughts are limited. So you currently have a thought, you currently have an experience in your life, maybe it's your financial status, maybe it's your relationship, maybe it's your health, does not matter, that you feel very safe and comfortable at. But I want you to find one that you're maybe comfortable at or not, but that you want more, that there is a desire for more. Recognize where you're playing it safe. Maybe you're okay in your relationship or your job, in your health, but really your heart of hearts really wants something different or more, but you stay where you are because it's safe. It has become stable. And stable isn't always good. It's safe. It could be fearful. It just has been what you've been doing the whole time. You're holding on because you're afraid that if you let go, you're not going to have something else, right? So we're going to invite the trickster in. So at the bottom of the triangle, write what you currently have that's stable, but that you know you want an upgrade for or upgrade on. At the top, let's just say an example. You make 100,000, you want to move up to 200,000. That could be your stability and where you want to go financially. In the center of the triangle, in the mezuzah, we use the Shema prayer. And it basically summarizes that there's only one God, that we're all one. So whatever is your prayer, there's only one. If you're attracted to a certain prayer that you know that you chant regularly or you say regularly, you can put that in there. You can put there is no other, we're all one, everything's a divine connection, whatever you're drawn to. But the bottom is what you currently have that you do not want, that you want to destroy. And at the top is what you want the new thing to enter, the upgrade to what you have. If no fear, no doubt, had full faith in the divine to bring it, that's what you want. And then your prayer, your words in the center of the triangle. Once you have that, I want you to fold it. I'm just going to show you the picture again of how it looks. I'm going to fold it neatly, like a little vertical. and hold it to your heart. And say in your mind's eye a prayer that you're inviting in the destruction of what is stable, the destruction of the illusion, the destruction of your fear, so that the Creator can do His will, not your will. You're willing to surrender. You don't know what it's going to look like. You're taking a leap of faith. And you're inviting in the trickster to shatter your stable foundation right now, to allow something newer, better, more grander in, not knowing, but you're going to trust that this is going to enter. And so connect to that with your heart and your mezuzah on your chest. Connect to that, see what comes up for you. And you don't have to do it now, but this evening, tape it to your front door. And tomorrow and the following day, as you leave to work in the morning, perhaps touch it, pray on it, invite the trickster to continue shattering the illusions and the false stability, and allow what you want to enter. And that takes faith. And if you're not there yet, you don't have to do it today. But when you're ready, when you're there, when you have that feeling of, I can invite this in and do this activity. Any questions?
I have a
So,
question.
yes.
Two, two things. When you say tape it to your door, like to your bedroom door, or does it have to be the front door? Is there a specific door?
There's no have to. Whatever you're feeling is correct.
And when
So
you're
that's
ready,
part of trusting that what you're getting is what you're getting.
and this is something that you do daily?
Well, if you did it now, or if you're going to do it later and make it pretty, whatever you want, when you make your actual mezuzah and you do that, you can put it on the door, and each day as part of the ritual, you might sage it, you might touch it, you might evoke a god, you might evoke the god, whatever you're called to do to interact. What you're doing is you're inviting in the destruction of the stability rooted on fear and certainty. You're inviting in a bit of chaos and disorientation to allow God to work His miracle. Instead of you holding on in fear, you're allowing faith. And that's why I was talking about God working in mysterious ways and God showing up in the weirdest places, right? Because sometimes people will say, I found God at the bottom of the bottle, because that's what led them to AA. And then that's what led them to service, right? So you don't know where you're going to find that, but you have to start doing something different. So the invitation with this ritual and with a trickster God is to say, what I have now is not enough for me. I actually want more. So that's the first premise. And inviting that in the way it comes, and having the faith that it's going to come. And yes, you're going to be maybe crazy about how it looks, but at the other side of it, you're going to realize, wow, that was divine guidance.
Okay,
Does
thank
that
you.
help?
Yes.
A few things about tricksters. If you hear someone say thing in threes, like if they say, yes, 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 or if there's a thematic of three, the number three, you're also in sort of the grab of the trickster, which brings me to a principle that is found in most spiritual philosophies. Father, Son, Holy Ghost, right? The Trinity. The Trimurti, Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma, 3. In science, positive, negative, neutral, or proton, electron, neutron. When there's 3, it's change. The triangle is a symbol for delta, change in science. The triangle is the symbol in alchemy of fire. Fire is the only element that creates change, consciousness, choice, free will, burns karma. And it's the only element we're in control of. So even though the trickster's a bit scary because we're inviting in uncertainty, it's the only archetype that actually invites change in. And it works with, for instance, the magician and some of the other archetypes to move us forward. Any questions about that? So wholeness is mirrored to identify blind spots. I always think this is so cool, how this is pi, P-I-E, is 3.14. I just think it's another cool thing about how everything's in relationship. So I'm going to show you a clip. I'm going to stop the recording. For those of you that are watching the recording, the link is here. It's a scene from the movie The Mask. This is a very old movie. I want to say it's early or late 90s. Jim Carrey finds a mask, and every time he puts it on, he turns into this like crazy character, very trickster. They're going to mention a trickster god from the Norse pantheon named Loki. And it's the last sentence of this clip that really is the message. So give me one moment and I will play that. So this mask that he finds, every time he puts it on, he turns into this green face, and he's like this kind of nice, timid guy that works in a bank. And all of a sudden, he's like this lively character, and he has guts, and he asks women out, and he robs banks, and he turns into this completely different persona. And he saw this guy on TV who wrote this book, very Jungian. You know, these are masks and personas that we wear. And so when these archetypes enter, specifically these tricksters, they tend to have that characteristic that they're fun and they're playful and they gamble and they take risks, and we're enamored by them, but we won't dare be that. And that is aspects of us. So all of the masks that we wear, plus the ones that we judge others for wearing, we're all in that's the beauty of what makes us a whole integrated person. And he spoke about metaphor, but sometimes this stuff is very literal. And so even though the subconscious and the collective unconscious works with symbol and metaphor and myth that we use a lot in spirituality, sometimes it's really literal. You see somebody that's behaving a certain way, you're like, oh, I do that, or I want to include that in my life. So it doesn't have to only be metaphors. Sometimes it's extremely literal how these archetypes show up in our life. Any questions? Okay, so we're going to do one final meditation before we close. And I would like for you to close your eyes. And once again, take a few deep breaths. And send all of the energy to your chest, to your hands. Pay attention to the breath. And really feel centered in the body. And I want you to imagine that you're at a carnival. And the ride is the fun house, the house of mirrors. The mirrors that distort the views of yourself as you stand in front of each of the different mirrors. Before you walk into the funhouse, stand at the threshold, invite in various tricksters, various masks, different aspects of yourself. If you feel safe where you are, invite 3 aspects of yourself that you're really not comfortable with. Perhaps what you judge in others, glimpses that you've had that exist in you but don't dare to really interact with. And the more unsavory, the better. And walk into the funhouse and let those 3 aspects show up on the different mirrors. Check in with your body to see what you're feeling. Maybe they show up as your nemesis, a person you dislike, an ex-partner, a character on TV. Or maybe it's you at a really bad time in your life that you never want to see that part of you again. But let 3 aspects that you're not comfortable with, that you do not consider beautiful, emerge on the mirrors. Walk through the funhouse. They may all appear in one mirror. You may need to move and go to 3 different ones. However they emerge, just make contact with them and recognize that they're parts of you that just want recognition. If you feel safe to take 1, 2, or 3 aspects by the hand, you can, or you can leave them in the mirror. And when you're ready, find the exit, walk out of the funhouse with or without the parts. Feel firmly in your chair. Take a few deep breaths to get centered in your body. And when you're ready, open your eyes. So does anyone want to share what aspects of yourself did you meet? Did they show up as you or perhaps an other in your life? Was it comfortable? Was it safe?
They were all me, and I took them all with me.
Do you want to share what they were?
No, I won't get into the specifics, but like definitely not the most pleasant versions of myself. Like nobody I'd really want to display too much, but I was like still like acknowledge that like in the video, like we are all one, even though it looks really different. The masks look really different. Like that's still me. And leaving them there would just invoke delusion. And like, I'm not delusional about that. Those parts are still me. just perhaps in a different lens, you know, in another way. So I feel like that was an important part of the meditation. I really enjoyed it because it kind of like helped heal that, I guess, in a little bit.
Thank you. Patty?
Did you say Patty?
Mhm.
Okay.
I saw your hand.
Yeah, they were all me as well.
Your face, your physical face.
Yes. Yeah.
Were they different ages? Did you recognize them as you?
It was me throughout my whole I don't mind sharing. Like for instance, one of them is like people pleaser. You know, like always a people pleaser. The other one is always fear. You know, always fear. So, and I took them with me.
You did? Okay. So pay attention to the language. Nothing is always and nothing is never. And that's one of the first things that we can start doing to change and to start, creating awareness around our consciousness expansion is it can't be always. So what I invite you to do is find one instance. I mean, I just know in the past couple of weeks, I can speak to an instance where you weren't fearful, right? Find one instance in your life that you weren't fearful, where you weren't a people pleaser. If you can find one instance where you were not that, a pattern has already started. One, that's all it takes. A pattern to solidify takes the three because we're turning around. Remember, like I said before, but the minute we do something once, a pattern has already started, and all you have to do is strengthen it. So when you're journaling or contemplating, think about one moment or one time where you weren't a people pleaser, connect to that, how that felt versus what it feels like to people please. And when you've had fear versus when you haven't had fear, and start connecting, relating to what comes into the field from those two experiences. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so Anima Mundi meets Axis Mundi. So we're all in the field and we are the Axis Mundi. And so therefore the microcosm and the macrocosm, as within, so without. Anything in the natural world, the weather, animals, plants, people that impact us, that causes some rift, some disturbance, is information for us to grow from. The more that we expand and get information from this field, the more whole, the more integrated, the more light we bring to ourselves and to humanity to move forward. And it's all in function of one thing. This work is to recognize that being human is difficult, that humans have low level consciousness, that we don't feel very safe and comfortable, much less with ourselves, with others, right? And so it's the invitation to be free, to remove masks, to recognize that we're human, and that suffering and pain is part of the human condition. When we can own our shadowy, dark parts, our funhouse mirror, not savory parts, what this allows us to do is have tolerance, compassion, and mercy for another. And so our suffering is no longer in vain. That's what we call stupid suffering. In spirituality, when we recognize that it connects us to the rest of humanity, to all of the natural world, to all of the cosmic planes, that's called intentional suffering. And that's how we're going to move forward as a humanity. So wholeness and interconnectedness, all the pieces belong. The savory, the unsavory, they all belong. The shadow parts, the angry parts, the lazy parts, the beautiful parts, the people-pleasing parts, all of it. There's a place for everything. So we don't want to discard anything. And this is a process that doesn't end. This is a continual thing where we're getting information from the field, we relate it back to ourselves. We get it from the field, we relate it back to ourselves. That process of reciprocity and relationship means that we're in constant flow with our intuition, with the divine intelligence, with the cosmos. Intuition is not supposed to be a trickle. It's not supposed to be one and done. It's not supposed to be every blue moon you get a hit. Intuition is a constant flow with the divine, but it requires this type of work, and it requires not feeling separate from that. And the more we do shadow work, the more we get information and we realize that it's us, the more we look at our low consciousness and bring illumination to it, the stronger that connection and that flow gets. And then we're in a constant stream of being connected to the cosmic consciousness while we're fully embodied in our physical form. So the axis mundi and the anima mundi, now that narcissistic framework that I mentioned before, that we can't see the other, now the other is us. Now we can start to assume, oh, I have been here. Let me have compassion on this person. Oh, I recognize this in myself. Let me be more tolerant. And that's how we can start to get out of this narcissistic tendency that we all have. In spirituality, and it sounds beautiful, it's all love, right? The idea of wholeness and interconnectedness and love is all there is. Every spiritual text ends in the fact that everything is love, but that is not how the spiritual path begins. That's the end of the spiritual path. That's the gift of walking a path. That's the gift of shadow work. That's the gift of coming in contact with your unsavory parts. That's the gift of embracing all of the things that were negated in you as a child. And so the end result is the love, because once you can collect all of your pieces, all of them belong, love them, then and only then can you really, truly love this so-called other. So this process combines spirit and matter, the axis mundi and the anima mundi, the earthly and the spiritual. The low consciousness and the high consciousness, our lower selves and our more divine selves. The light aspects and the dark aspects, our shallowness and our depth. And so this work never ends. This is the constant spiritual path, even when you're back at the return home, at that last threshold that I said was salmon, back at the start of it all. This is the constant dialogue. In order to continue being whole and interconnected and strengthening the intuition, two of my go-to questions: what don't you like about it? And where do I have that in myself that I'm seemingly judging in this other? That is the gift that keeps on giving. That doesn't matter what size field, one person, two people, 1,000 people, those two questions are constantly going to give you pie. Any questions? So thank you all for coming to my birthday lecture. And I'm going to close up Sacred Space if there are no other questions. Remember, at the end of Sacred Space, just say aho.
Oh, well, here we are.
Strengthen the wounds of the West, specifically serpent and all of the tricks or gods that were here tonight. Thank you for allowing us to uncover these dark parts that sit in the cave of the collective unconscious and our own personal unconscious, so that we can befriend them and illuminate them in the South with light, with fire, with failures, with mistakes, through relationship of others. The wounds of the North and the East, where we raise consciousness and day in and day out choose this path. Mother Earth, Father Sky, as the anchors from the anima mundi and the axis mundi, and the creator, the divine intelligence, in all the ways that you show up, in all the relationships, all of the disturbances and messages you give us through your field. Aho. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh.
Oh,
Aho.
Oh,
Aho. I want to say one last thing before we go, in terms of the faces of how the divine can show up. And I have 3 examples of the trickster, but in more of a divine face, just to kind of invite that other side in. This is Hanuman, the monkey god from the Hindu pantheon. He's my Ishvadevatar, which is like my image of God, my godhead. This is a whirling dervish from the Sufi tradition, and they do these divine dances. It's like twirling and whirling, which gets you out of that sort of axis so that you can sort of be disoriented as a ritual. And the storyteller in shamanism. In the stories and sharing of the stories, we really learn about the other and we learn about the shared human experience. And so I just wanted to kind of close up with 3 different faces, that it's not always just mischievous and gambling and trickery gods, but there all are on each pantheon divine faces as well. So thank you for all of your faces for showing up here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. Happy
thank
birthday.
you.
Thank you.
Happy
Best
birthday.
birthday party ever.
Happy
Love
birthday.
you guys.
You.
love you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.